Look, I need to get this off my chest because what happened yesterday at Nova's family BBQ has me seeing red, and I can't think straight. 3 years I've been with this woman. 3 years of watching her family treat me like I'm some charity case they're stuck tolerating. And I finally thought I had something that would shut them up. Boy, was I wrong. Let me back up because you need the full picture to understand why I'm so pissed. Nova comes from money, real money. The kind where her dad owns multiple rental properties and her mom drives a brand new BMW every 2 years. Meanwhile, I work in IT support, decent job, but nothing flashy. And I live in a one-bedroom apartment that's clean, but definitely not impressive by their standards. From day one, her family made it clear I wasn't good enough. Her brother Ryder would make these snide comments about how I probably shop at discount stores. And her mother Arlene had this way of asking about my job that made it sound like she was asking about my prison sentence. Nova herself was different in the beginning, or at least I thought she was. She said she didn't care about money, that she liked how down-to-earth I was compared to the guys she dated in college. But over time, I started noticing things. How she'd get embarrassed when we went to her friends' parties and I'd mention where I worked. How she'd change the subject when people asked about our weekend plans because we couldn't afford the ski trips or wine tastings her crowd was always doing. How she'd light up whenever her ex Thomas was mentioned, the guy who apparently took her to Europe twice during their 2-year relationship. Thomas. This guy shows up to every family gathering like he's still part of the clan. Which honestly he might as well be since Arlene treats him like the son she never had. Investment banker, drives a Tesla, wears watches that cost more than my monthly rent. Nova always claimed they were just friends now, that he was like family. But I caught the way she'd laugh a little too hard at his jokes and how she'd always find excuses to touch his arm when she talked to him. 6 months ago, I decided enough was enough. Not that I was going to break up with her. Hell no. I was going to prove that I could give her something none of these privileged jerks could. Nova had been obsessed with cherry blossom season in Japan since college, had this whole Pinterest board dedicated to it, always talking about how it was her dream destination. So I started saving. I picked up weekend consulting work, sold my gaming setup, ate nothing but ramen and peanut butter sandwiches for months. I researched everything about Tokyo during Sakura season, found the perfect 2-week itinerary that would hit all the spots she'd been dreaming about. The booking process was intense. Cherry blossom season is the time to visit Japan, so everything fills up fast and costs a fortune. I spent weeks comparing flights, hotels, and activities. I ended up booking us into a capsule hotel for part of the trip because, honestly, it was what I could afford. But I thought it would be this cool, authentic Japanese experience. I got us tickets to the Cherry Blossom Festival in Ueno Park, booked a traditional tea ceremony, even splurged on a day trip to Mount Fuji. The total cost was almost $8,000, which for me meant wiping out my entire savings account and putting some on credit cards. When I finally had everything booked and printed out this beautiful itinerary with photos of all the places we'd visit, I was so excited I could barely sleep. This was it. This was going to be the moment that proved I wasn't just some broke loser who couldn't give Nova the life she wanted. This was going to shut up Ryder and his constant digs about my financial situation. This was going to make Arlene realize that maybe the guy who saves up for months to make his girlfriend's dream come true is worth more than the guy who just throws money around because daddy's trust fund makes it easy. I decided to surprise her at Ryder's monthly family BBQ yesterday. These things are always torture for me. 3 hours of watching Nova's family and their country club friends talk about their boats and vacation homes while I smile and nod like an idiot. But I thought this time would be different. I thought I was finally going to have my moment. The BBQ was at Ryder's house, this massive place with a pool and outdoor kitchen that probably costs more than my annual salary. The usual crowd was there, about 15 people total, including Thomas, who'd apparently driven up from the city just for burger and potato salad. I spent the first hour listening to him tell everyone about his recent business trip to Dubai, while Nova hung on every word like he was recounting his journey to discover fire. I was getting more and more wound up watching this performance, but I kept telling myself it would all be worth it in about 10 minutes when I dropped my surprise. I waited until everyone was gathered around the pool area, drinks in hand, the perfect audience for my big reveal. I pulled out the folder with all the printed confirmations and itinerary and cleared my throat. Everyone turned to look at me, probably wondering why the broke boyfriend was interrupting their conversation about exotic car rentals. Nova looked curious, but not particularly excited, which should have been my first warning sign. I started explaining about the trip, about how I knew how much she wanted to see Japan during cherry blossom season, about all the research I'd done, and the special places I'd booked for us to visit. I was watching her face, expecting to see excitement, gratitude, maybe even some tears of joy. Instead, I saw her expression slowly change from confusion to something that looked almost like disgust. She took the folder from my hands and started flipping through the pages, and I could see her face getting redder with each confirmation she read. The whole group had gone quiet watching this unfold, and I realized this wasn't going the way I'd imagined at all. That's when she looked up at me with this expression I'd never seen before, like I'd just handed her a bag of garbage instead of a dream vacation, and said the words that are still ringing in my ears today. But honestly, what happened next was so much worse than anything I could have prepared for. I'll post an update later because I need to process what went down and figure out my next move. Let's just say the 127 missed calls and 89 text messages I've gotten since last night tell me Nova's finally realizing what she just threw away. Update 1. Holy hell, Reddit. The comments on my last post have been incredible, and honestly, some of you called exactly what was going to happen. The person who said Nova sounds like she was embarrassed by the capsule hotel was spot on. And to the guy who predicted she'd make a scene in front of everyone, you must be psychic because that's exactly what went down. So where I left off, Nova was flipping through my carefully planned itinerary, and her face was getting redder by the second. The whole BBQ crowd was watching this unfold, and I'm standing there like an idiot thinking maybe she's just overwhelmed by the surprise. Then she looked up at me with this expression of pure disgust and said, in front of everyone, that I was a pathetic loser who thinks she's some desperate weeaboo who would wet herself over anime land. But wait, it gets so much worse. She started waving the itinerary around like it was contaminated, asking loudly what kind of broke backpacker books capsule hotels. She actually used those exact words, broke backpacker. Then Arlene, her mother, started cackling like this was the funniest thing she'd ever heard and chimed in that even Nova's high school boyfriend had better taste. I'm standing there trying to process what's happening while 15 people are staring at me like I just proposed with a ring pop. Thomas is trying to hide his smirk behind his beer, but doing a terrible job of it. Ryder is shaking his head like he expected this exact scenario, and Nova is still going, getting louder and more vicious with each word. She grabbed the printed tickets and confirmations right out of my hands and started heading toward the outdoor fire pit they had going. She turned back to the crowd and announced that she was going to burn this garbage along with my last shred of dignity. Then, and I swear this actually happened, she winked at Thomas and asked if he was ready for real romance in Paris. Paris. This woman who I've been dating for 3 years, who I've been living with for 8 months, who told me she loved me just that morning, is talking about going to Paris with her ex while she feeds my $8,000 vacation to the flames. She actually said the words "there goes your cringe fantasy" as she watched the papers burn. And you know what the worst part was? Everyone applauded. Her entire family and their friends gave her a round of applause for humiliating me in the most brutal way possible. I just stood there for what felt like forever, watching 3 years of my life and every penny I'd saved go up in smoke, literally. The only thing I could manage to say was enjoy the fire before I turned around and walked out without another word. The drive home was when everything really started hitting me. Not just the embarrassment, but the realization that this whole relationship had been a lie. Nova didn't see me as her boyfriend. She saw me as some charity case she was temporarily stuck with until something better came along. The way she looked at Thomas during her little performance, the way her family reacted like this was inevitable. The way she already had Paris plans lined up. This wasn't a spontaneous reaction to my gift. This was her exit strategy. I got back to our apartment around 9 p.m. and Nova wasn't there, which honestly was a relief because I needed time to think. That's when I started putting pieces together that I'd been too stupid or too in love to see before. Like how Nova never contributed to rent or groceries despite having access to her trust fund. How she'd been staying late at work more often lately, always with some excuse about project deadlines that never seemed to actually exist. How she'd been taking more calls in the other room, claiming they were about wedding planning for her friend's upcoming ceremony. The missed calls and texts started around 11 p.m. First, just a few. Then, a constant stream. She was still at Ryder's house based on the background noise I could hear when she left voicemails. And from what I could piece together, the party had moved into celebration mode after my departure. Apparently, Thomas had been planning to ask her to go to Paris with him for weeks, and my disastrous surprise had given them the perfect opportunity to make their reunion public. But here's where it gets interesting, and why I'm not some heartbroken victim crying into my pillow. See, while I was driving home and processing this betrayal, I wasn't just feeling sorry for myself. I was getting angrier and angrier, and anger makes me very, very focused. Because the thing Nova and her whole entitled family don't know about me is that I might work in IT support, but I'm really good at what I do. Really good. Over the past 3 years, I've been the tech guy for their entire circle. I've set up Nova's laptop and cloud storage. I've fixed Arlene's tablet and showed her how to use all her banking apps. I've helped Ryder with his home network and security system. I've troubleshot Thomas's phone issues when he's been over for family dinners. I've been the friendly neighborhood computer guy who fixes everyone's problems and never asks for anything in return except basic human decency. What none of them realized is that being the tech support guy means you learn a lot about people's digital lives. You see their browsing habits, their saved passwords, their backup systems, their online accounts. You understand how all their devices sync together and where their important files are stored. Most people have terrible digital security and they trust the IT guy completely because, hey, he's just some harmless nerd who's dating Nova, right? The voicemails kept coming through the night. Nova alternating between trying to explain herself and getting defensive when her explanations sounded ridiculous even to her. She kept saying I should have known better than to plan something so embarrassing, that I should have realized she would never want to stay in a capsule hotel, that I was trying to force some weird fantasy on her that had nothing to do with who she actually is. In one message, she actually said she was trying to save me from further embarrassment by ending things publicly, like she was doing me a favor. In another, she claimed Thomas had been offering to take her to Paris for months, and she kept saying no out of loyalty to me. But after my stunt tonight, she realized she deserved better than someone who would try to make her look stupid in front of her family. But the last few messages were different. Those started around 3 a.m., and the tone completely changed. Suddenly, she was apologizing, saying she might have overreacted, asking if we could talk when she got home, saying she realized the trip planning must have taken a lot of effort, and maybe she was too harsh, begging me to answer my phone because she was getting scared that I wasn't responding. I know exactly why her tone changed, and it wasn't because she suddenly grew a conscience. It was because someone at that party, probably after a few too many drinks, reminded her about a few practical realities she'd forgotten in her rush to publicly dump me for Thomas. Like the fact that I'm the only name on our apartment lease because I'm the one who qualified financially and handled all the paperwork. Like the fact that her laptop and all her design work for her freelance clients is stored on the cloud system I set up and manage. Like the fact that I'm the authorized user on several of the household accounts because she finds dealing with utility companies and service providers boring. Tomorrow is Monday, which means Nova is going to come home expecting to have a long conversation about how we can work through this misunderstanding. She's going to try to frame her public humiliation of me as some kind of communication breakdown that we can fix if we just talk it through properly. She has no idea that I spent the hours while she was leaving me increasingly desperate voicemails doing some very thorough research into Thomas's recent business activities and Ryder's property management practices. Turns out, when you're good with technology and highly motivated by rage, you can learn some very interesting things about people's financial situations. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I need to see how she plays tomorrow's conversation, because I want to hear her try to justify what she did before I show her what 3 years of underestimating me is going to cost her. Update 2. Reddit. You're not going to believe how this conversation went down. Nova came home around noon on Monday looking like she'd been up all night, which she probably had based on the number of increasingly panicked voicemails she left me. She walked into our apartment like she was approaching a wild animal, all cautious and trying to gauge my mood. She started with the whole, "I know you're upset and we need to talk" approach, sitting down on the couch and patting the spot next to her like we were going to have some mature discussion about our relationship. I stayed standing by the kitchen counter because I wanted the distance and, honestly, I didn't trust myself to sit close to her without losing it completely. She launched into this long explanation about how embarrassed she was by the trip planning, how she felt like I didn't really know her if I thought she'd want to stay in a capsule hotel, how the whole thing felt like I was trying to force her into some version of herself that wasn't real. She kept saying she overreacted, but that I had to understand her perspective, that she felt cornered and humiliated in front of her family. I let her talk for about 10 minutes before I asked her to explain the Paris comment and the winking at Thomas. That's when her whole reasonable adult facade started cracking. She got defensive immediately, saying Thomas had mentioned Paris months ago as just a friend thing, that she only brought it up in the heat of the moment because she was trying to make a point about what real planning looks like. But here's where it got interesting. When I pressed her on what she meant by real planning, she couldn't help herself from explaining exactly why my gift was so inadequate. Apparently, the issue wasn't just the capsule hotel, though she spent a solid 5 minutes describing how mortifying it would be to tell her friends she stayed in what she called a glorified sleeping pod. The real problem was that I planned this trip without consulting her, without considering her social media presence, without thinking about how the photos would look or what story she'd be able to tell when people asked about her vacation. She actually said the words, "I can't post Instagram photos from a capsule hotel like this" was a completely reasonable thing to base travel decisions on. She went on about how Thomas understands the importance of experiences that photograph well, how his Paris suggestion included a five-star hotel in the 7th arrondissement and dinner reservations at places that would make her friends jealous. This is when I realized that Nova's rejection of my gift wasn't really about the gift at all. It was about the fact that I fundamentally misunderstood what she valued and what she wanted from our relationship. To her, I wasn't a boyfriend who saved for months to make her dream come true. I was a boyfriend who didn't understand that her dreams were supposed to be expensive and enviable, not authentic or meaningful. She kept trying to explain this like it was reasonable, like I should understand that she needs a certain lifestyle to be happy and that my Tokyo trip just highlighted how different our expectations are. She said maybe this was good for both of us, that we could figure out if we were really compatible or if we'd been fooling ourselves. That's when I asked her directly if she was planning to break up with me for Thomas. She got flustered and started backtracking, saying Thomas was just a friend, that the Paris thing wasn't serious, that she was just angry and said things she didn't mean. But then she let slip that they'd actually been texting more frequently lately about her frustration with our relationship, and that Thomas had been encouraging her to think about what she really wanted in life. So there it was. My girlfriend of 3 years had been using her ex as a relationship counselor, complaining to him about me and letting him convince her that she deserved better. The public humiliation at the BBQ wasn't a spontaneous reaction to my gift. It was her exit strategy that Thomas had been coaching her toward for months. I told her I needed some time to process everything she'd said, and that maybe she should stay at her friend Annabelle's place for a few days while we figured out what we wanted to do. She immediately started panicking, asking where she was supposed to get her work files, how she was supposed to access her client projects. What about all her stuff in our apartment? That's when I calmly reminded her that all her important files are stored in the cloud system I set up and manage, that most of her mail comes to our address, which is only in my name, and that several of our shared accounts are in my name because she never wanted to deal with the paperwork. I suggested she might want to start handling some of those adult responsibilities herself since she's reevaluating what she wants from life. She started getting really agitated at this point, demanding to know if I was threatening to cut off her access to things out of spite. I told her I wasn't threatening anything, just pointing out that she might want to think through the practical implications of whatever decision she was going to make about our relationship. But here's what Nova didn't realize during our long conversation. While she was explaining to me why my gift was so inadequate and why Thomas's approach to romance was superior, I was mentally cataloging every detail she gave me about their texting relationship and their Paris plans. And while she was getting increasingly upset about the practical aspects of potentially moving out, I was already 3 steps ahead on exactly how those practical aspects were going to play out. See, what I discovered during my Sunday night research session wasn't just interesting information about Thomas's business dealings. I found out that his investment firm is currently under scrutiny from their compliance department for some questionable client recommendations, and that Ryder's property management company has been cutting corners on safety inspections to maximize profits from his rental units. But more importantly, I learned that Nova's freelance design business, which he's been building while living rent-free in my apartment, has been using the business license and tax structure I helped her set up 2 years ago. The same business license that lists my address and has me as the registered agent because she found the paperwork too boring to handle herself. After she left for Annabelle's place that evening, I made a few phone calls. First, to our landlord, giving him a heads up that I might be the only tenant going forward and asking about the process for removing someone from the lease who was never officially on it anyway. Then to the utility companies, since everything is in my name, letting them know I might be scaling back services. But the most important call was to Nova's biggest client, a boutique marketing firm that's been giving her consistent work for the past 8 months. I introduced myself as the registered agent for her business and explained that due to some changes in her business structure, they might want to verify that their current contracts and payment arrangements are going to be honored going forward. Turns out, they'd been having some concerns about Nova's recent responsiveness and delivery times. They were very interested to learn that her business registration and client management systems might be experiencing some disruptions. Nova called me around 10 p.m., completely frantic. Apparently, her client had reached out asking for clarification about her business status and whether their upcoming projects were secure. She was demanding to know what I'd said to them and accusing me of sabotaging her career out of spite. I told her I was just being responsible about my legal obligations as the registered agent for her business, and that if she wanted to handle her own professional relationships going forward, she should probably start by handling her own business registration. She's been calling and texting nonstop since then, alternating between fury and panic. But I'm not answering anymore because I'm busy preparing for the final phase of this situation. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with Thomas directly, not to fight or cause a scene, but to have a conversation about his role in destroying my relationship and his plans for Nova's future. Because what he doesn't know yet is that his investment firm's compliance issues are about to become much more complicated, and Nova's financial situation is about to become much more precarious. They wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone. They wanted to prove that I'm not good enough for their world. Well, they're about to learn exactly what the quiet IT guy has been capable of all along. Final update: Reddit. I promised you a satisfying conclusion, and holy hell did I deliver. The last week has been absolutely wild, and I'm still processing everything that went down. Shout out to everyone who said I should document everything and use my IT skills strategically. You guys were spot on about how this was going to play out. So I met with Thomas on Wednesday at a coffee shop near his office. I wanted to see this investment banker Prince in person and have a real conversation about his role in destroying my relationship. He showed up looking exactly like you'd expect. Expensive suit, fancy watch, that confident smirk that rich guys wear when they think they're untouchable. He started by trying to be all diplomatic, saying he never meant for things to get so messy, that Nova had been unhappy for months, and he was just being a good friend by listening to her complaints. But when I pressed him on whether a good friend encourages someone to publicly humiliate their boyfriend, his whole reasonable act fell apart pretty quickly. He told me I should be thanking him for helping Nova realize what she actually wanted in life before we wasted any more time together. He said some people are just meant for different lifestyles and that he was doing me a favor by showing Nova what real romantic gestures look like. Then he actually had the nerve to suggest that maybe this would motivate me to work harder and improve my financial situation. That's when I decided to share some of the research I'd done about his investment firm. I mentioned that I'd noticed some interesting patterns in their client recommendations and wondered if his compliance department was aware of how many clients had been steered toward high-risk investments that coincidentally generated higher commissions for Thomas personally. His smug expression disappeared really fast when I started reciting specific client names and portfolio details. He demanded to know how I had access to that information, and I calmly explained that when you're the IT guy who fixes everyone's computers and phones, people tend to leave their business emails and documents accessible without thinking about it. I told him I wasn't planning to do anything with the information I'd gathered, but I thought he should know that his digital security practices were pretty sloppy for someone in his position, especially since his upcoming Paris trip with Nova would probably be expensive and he'd want to make sure his income stream stayed reliable. He tried to threaten me, saying I was playing with fire by accessing confidential business information, but I reminded him that I'd never accessed anything illegally. I'd simply been observant during the many times I'd provided tech support for his devices when he visited Nova's family. If he'd been more careful about logging out of accounts and securing his files, that would have been his choice to make. By the time our conversation ended, Thomas looked significantly less confident about his Paris plans. I suggested he might want to focus on his professional situation before making any major romantic commitments, especially ones that might require explaining expensive vacations to compliance investigators. But dealing with Thomas was just the warm-up act. The real satisfaction came from watching Nova's situation unravel over the rest of the week. Remember how I mentioned that Nova's freelance design business was registered using an address with me as the agent? Well, it turns out that when you're no longer living at the registered address and the agent is no longer willing to accept legal documents on your behalf, business operations can get very complicated very quickly. Nova's biggest client, already concerned about her recent reliability issues, decided they needed more stable contractor relationships for their upcoming projects. When they couldn't get clear answers about her business status and discovered that her registered address was in dispute, they terminated her contract and demanded return of the advance payments they'd made for work she hadn't completed yet. Her other clients started asking similar questions when they couldn't reach her at her business address, and her email responses became increasingly frantic. Turns out, when your entire professional setup depends on systems managed by someone else, you're pretty vulnerable when that relationship ends badly. But the real kicker came when Nova tried to move back in with her family temporarily while she figured out her living situation. Apparently, Ryder's rental property empire, which I'd also done some research on, had been generating nice profits by cutting corners on safety inspections and maintenance requirements. I happened to mention to a friend who works for the city's housing inspection department that I'd noticed some concerning patterns in maintenance records for certain rental properties, and provided him with the addresses of several units that might benefit from thorough safety reviews. Funny how quickly rental income disappears when you actually have to bring properties up to code and pay for all the repairs you've been deferring. Ryder suddenly wasn't so enthusiastic about supporting Nova financially while she got back on her feet. And Arlene, who had been so entertained by my public humiliation, Well, it turns out that when you rely on your IT-savvy daughter's boyfriend to manage all your digital accounts and device security, losing that tech support can be really inconvenient, especially when you're not exactly tech literate yourself and start falling for every phishing email and malware download that comes your way. I'm not saying I did anything to compromise her devices, but I'm also not providing free tech support anymore to people who think humiliating me is entertaining. If she wants to figure out why her tablet keeps showing pop-up ads and her email account keeps getting hacked, she can pay someone else to fix it. The desperate calls and texts I mentioned from Nova have continued all week, but the tone has shifted dramatically. She's no longer trying to justify what happened or explain her relationship with Thomas. Now she's begging me to help her salvage her business, demanding that I restore her access to client files, and threatening legal action if I don't cooperate with her attempts to get her life back on track. But here's the beautiful part. I haven't actually done anything illegal or even unethical. I've simply stopped providing free services to people who treated me like garbage. I've withdrawn the financial and technical support that I was giving out of love and generosity for 3 years. I've stopped being the helpful IT guy who fixes everyone's problems and asks for nothing in return except basic human decency. Nova keeps screaming about how I'm destroying her life out of spite, but I'm not destroying anything. I'm just not building her life for her anymore. There's a difference, and she's finally learning what that difference costs. Thomas hasn't called me back since our coffee meeting, but I heard through mutual connections that his firm's compliance department has been asking some very pointed questions about his recent client recommendations. Apparently, when multiple regulatory bodies start asking about the same patterns at the same time, investment firms take those inquiries very seriously. As for their Paris trip, well, let's just say that when you're potentially facing professional sanctions and your girlfriend's income has completely collapsed, romantic getaways become much less feasible. Nova sent me one final text yesterday that perfectly summed up how little she understood about our relationship. She wrote that she couldn't believe I was being so vindictive over one mistake, that she never thought I was the type of person who would try to ruin someone's life over hurt feelings. One mistake. 3 years of using me for financial support, technical services, and emotional labor while complaining about me to her ex behind my back was one mistake. Publicly humiliating me in front of 15 people and burning my dream gift while announcing her plans to run off with another man was one mistake. I wrote back and told her she was absolutely right. She never did think I was the type of person who would stand up for himself. That was her mistake. And now she gets to live with the consequences of underestimating the guy who spent 3 years making her life easier, while she took him for granted. The apartment is quiet now, just me and my thoughts and the peace that comes with finally understanding my own worth. I'm not heartbroken anymore. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done with people who think kindness is weakness and generosity is stupidity. Oh, and I booked that Tokyo trip for myself. Cherry blossom season, here I come. And I'm staying in whatever hotel I want because it's my money and my dream, and I don't need anyone's approval to make it happen. Sometimes the best revenge is just stopping being useful to people who don't appreciate you. Turns out that when you've been holding someone's entire life together behind the scenes, they notice pretty quickly when you stop.